Episode 1 of The Afterparty begins with a big 15-year reunion. Nick receives a message from Zoe, complete with smiley face emojis and an optimistic tone. Only, as we skip forward in time, this party is anything but optimistic. A guy called Xavier falls to his death. When police arrive at the scene, detectives Danner and Culp begin to investigate. Cooked shrimp lie around the body, while a blonde wig could prove to be another clue. There's also a hat under Xavier's body, which seems to hint that this isn't a suicide. A contusion on Xavier's nose only reinforces the idea that a fight broke out. Danner decides to get to the bottom of this. The pair head up to the party where a whole group of people are gathered together and shocked by the events that have transpired. Remember Nick? Well, he happens to have pen all over his face, and he's first up to be questioned. According to Indigo, she saw Nick at the scene of the crime. He was pranked with beer tipped over him, with Nick apparently claiming that this ends now. And according to her, during this art house black and white flashback, he's the killer and pushed Xavier off the balcony to his doom. Nick's version of events? A little different. In private, he speaks to Danner and gives his version of events. He only came to the party for Zoe. They used to be chemistry partners together, but he thinks they had genuine chemistry as a couple too. Working as an escape room designer, he mentions how he was puzzled over the smiley face emoji he received from recently divorced Zoe. Nick sees it as a sign. And when they both see each other, balloons get between them, but romantic music plays, and they begin giggling in slow motion. At the reunion, a guy called Walt pops up. Only, it seems like he's always been forgotten and overlooked at school. He tells Nick that this will be a night no one will ever forget until Xavier swoops in on a helicopter. During the night's events, Zoe ends up singing karaoke and, more specifically, Turn Back Time. Nick is encouraged to sing too, but the machine messes up and plays Kia's My Neck, My Back. It's absolutely hilarious, but this moment is quickly quashed when Xavier shows up and swoops in on Zoe. Hot-headed Brett arrives at Nick's table and immediately grabs a knife and flips a lid. He grits his teeth and tells them that he's going to kill anyone that touches Zoe. Why? Well, it turns out Brett is actually Zoe's ex-husband. And right now, his anger is directed at Xavier. Nick uses Jasper's gift of the gab to distract Xavier, while Nick and Zoe have a great evening together. They drink wine, draw, and just before they kiss, Zoe's daughter Maggie shows up. Unfortunately, the moment is gone, and because of that, Xavier swoops in and flies off with Zoe alone, leaving Nick in the rain. Emotional rain, to be precise. Chelsea stirs things up further in the parking lot, claiming that Nick was making out with Zoe, and causing Brett to warn he's going to kill all of them. He even follows in his car too like a madman, as they drive up to Xavier's after party. Now, it seems like the cooked shrimp being knocked over was Nick's fault, after being shoved by Brett. Unfortunately, he passed out soon after, which is what led to his face being scribbled on. Indigo was there and did hear Nick say oh no, but his reaction was actually to do with the scribbles on his face, not pushing Xavier. After the interview, Nick heads into the bathroom to clean up. Only, in the bathroom he finds a slip of paper reading, "This is payback for what you did to me. Feel the pain." Deciding to keep this a secret, Nick hides the paper from Danner, as Brett shows up at the Episode 2 of The Afterparty begins with Brett questioned by Detective Danner. Nick and Jasper realize the intercom system is connected across the house and decide to do some snooping of their own. Under the guise that Nick has lost his phone and needs to retrace his steps, he seizes the opportunity to mess about on the intercom and broadcast what Brett is telling Danner. Brett shows up bang on time at the party. Satirizing the Fast and Furious movies, Brett talks to Ned and mentions how there's nothing more important than family. And in this case, preserving his family and launching Operation Silent Savior. Or, as Detective Danner so eloquently puts it, jamming the clam. You see, Brett and Zoe used to be together, and although they have broken up, Brett is overprotective of her and doesn't want any other guys to be with Zoe. Brett doesn't see Nick as a threat, but does focus on Xavier. Challenging each other to a urinating contest, Brett outdoes his competitor, but only riles things up further. In fact, Xavier even promises to sleep with Zoe too. This is where we catch up with Brett kicking off at the table. He's also the one responsible for setting up the Brett Zoe tribute video to play as well. When he notices Zoe slipping out, he hurries after her but is stopped every which way. One obstacle is Chelsea, who seems to be hatching a plan of her own against Xavier. While Brett talks, back in the present, Nick begins to piece together the bits of screwed up paper. He's found more slips of paper in the bin and believes it's a note from the killer. So why did Brett chase after Nick and the others? Well, it turns out Nick actually has his daughter's koala bear. He didn't tell them he's going to kill them after all. He was actually asking for the bear back. After getting cornered by a couple of lorries, Brett goes full-on action hero to break free, posing as a worker at Xavier's party and confronting Nick. After taking the bear and destroying the shrimp stand, Brett and Xavier both end up verbally sparring on the balcony. Zoe refuses to be part of this and heads back downstairs. Brett changes his mind and decides against fighting Xavier. Instead, he throws the celeb's hat off the balcony. Brett speaks to Zoe downstairs and talks openly about their divorce. He tells her she's free to hook up with Xavier now. She screws her nose at this though, pointing out she has no interest in him romantically. When Maggie rocks up at the party, wandering about, Brett makes an excuse and leaves. In doing so, he notices Chelsea getting chummy with Xavier and wanting to get him alone. Brett, though, sneaks out the back door and manages to give Maggie back her cola. Brett has been sneaking out every hour to go and check on his daughter. After interviewing Brett, Culp confronts Danner. As fate would have it, she doesn't have clearance to lead this case. She's only supposed to take witness statements. Well, with the captain closing in, Danner urges Culp to help her out, and eventually he does succumb and agree to play his part. At the same time, Nick and Jasper realize that the handwriting on the revenge note is actually the same as the handwriting on his neck. Alas, it seems like the killer is at the party, and also the note writer too. Unbeknownst to everyone else in the house, we pan across to Xavier's balcony once more, where it's revealed that there's actually a hidden camera, and it's pointed right at the spot Xavier. Episode 3 of the Afterparty starts with Nick and Jasper formulating a plan to find out who the killer is. How? Well, they're going to get all the other partygoers to write diarrhea and figure out who the backward S belonged to. Jasper also reveals that he's the one who set up the hidden camera and is quick to tell Culp and Danner as much. Only, Culp accidentally deletes all the footage. With Culp left with Nick and the others, it's Jasper's turn to tell his side of the story to Danner. With a musical tinge, this bouncy story lets Jasper take the spotlight. His music has a rapping edge, including the whole place erupting into song as the reunion gets underway. Now, Jasper spent a lot of time with Xavier that night, hustling and trying to get him to bless his track. In layman terms, this is when a big-name rapper stars on an up-and-coming artist's track. Xavier isn't exactly thrilled about this, but impatiently agrees when he notices Zoe has left with Nick, hurrying off to catch up. Jasper continues to remain fixated on the blessing, showing up at the after-party and waiting for Xavier to message back. After Nick passed out, Ned was the one who started writing on his face, at least kicking things off anyway by drawing a mustache. Xavier eventually does message back after the argument with Brett, telling him to meet in the studio in 10 minutes' time and to work on track 12. From afar, Jasper notices Xavier with Chelsea. Unfortunately, Xavier never showed up in the studio, but his text message does help narrow down a time of death. Meanwhile, Nick has everyone write down diarrhea to figure out who the killer is. However, he soon realizes there's a big problem. Jennifer, number 2, is missing. That means there could well be a second victim. And if that wasn't enough, the police have also found more evidence by Xavier's body. Evidence that links directly back to Chelsea. Episode 4 of the Afterparty begins with Jasper spooked and believing he's found something big. Convincing Danner to follow him, it turns out what he's seen is just a cardboard cutout. False alarm, guys. Danner eventually interviews Chelsea for her side of the story. The thing is, Nick happens to be hiding out in the room and hears everything. For Chelsea, the tone of her story shifts across to a psychological thriller, with emphasis on the paranoia consuming her prior to attending the reunion. Her motive for attending comes from getting revenge on Xavier. She has a serious grudge with him, linking all the way back to a St. Patrick's Day party. She's also there to find out who's sending her threatening messages too, but is convinced that whoever that person is, they're at the party. Now, Chelsea isn't exactly winning any popularity contests, and a lot of the people there aren't exactly fond of her. It turns out Chelsea was actually having an affair with Brett, which Nick hears from the other room. This is also the reason a lot of people have a problem with her at the reunion. It does appear that the constant threatening messages she receives is linked to this affair. After intentionally spilling her drink on Nick, Chelsea approaches Zoe and asks if she's the one sending the messages. She claims she's not, but that also leads her to bumping into Brett and telling him she's going to settle her score with Xavier. But why? What has Xavier done? We don't actually find out as it happens, but Chelsea does reveal that she's got tranquilizers in her bag which Nick ended up taking by accident. This explains why he passed out at the party. When Chelsea receives a photo of herself at the after party from that unknown number, she realizes the culprit is there with her. Chelsea is the one who left the message on Nick's hand, telling him I'm sorry, but mostly for the tranquilizer mix-up. Fast forward to her encounter with Xavier and Chelsea reveals all. Her true intentions for the night stem from wanting to drug him, get him naked and post pictures up over the internet. But then Xavier has already leaked naked pictures of himself, so for him, this isn't so much of a big deal. We don't learn a lot else here, but apparently Xavier left Chelsea at the St. Patrick's Day party and stranded her. When Xavier heads out to the balcony, Chelsea heads downstairs and speaks to Zoe in confidence. She apologizes for what happened between them and admits she regrets everything. They also share a nice little joke about Brett's terrible lovemaking too. Danner is not convinced by Chelsea's story. Something doesn't add up. Why did Chelsea have a change of heart? She deliberates over Nick's choice of words when he woke up too, specifically regarding Xavier doing this to him again. As Danner decides to bring Nick in to get to the bottom of this, Culp sets to work trying to find the guy. Only, he's obviously not in the party. Of course he's gone. He's in the other room and now he realizes his time may be up. Episode 5 of The Afterparty begins with Danner determined to find Nick, who's still hiding in the recording booth. With Germaine landing in an hour, Danner receives a call and is told to file her report immediately. Her career is on the line and as she reconnects with Culp, they approach the whole group, and this time the focus turns to Walt Butler. Who? Yep, that guy who constantly pops up in all the random parts of these episodes. Well, it turns out it goes deeper than that. Walt has been here the whole time, and the St. Patrick's Day party 15 years ago was actually held at his house. This then sees us jump back 15 years to high school as we see all of our characters much younger, including Xavier, who shows up in his sports car. The thing is, Xavier isn't exactly popular and adopted the Xavier alias early on to disguise his real name, Eugene. It's here where Brett takes a fancy to Zoe, while Chelsea finds herself rejected by the two Jennifers. Zoe does call them out for being mean, and at the party later on, she patches things up with Zoe, toasting over shots. Even back then, Nick fumbled over his words and tried to ask out Zoe, flirting in class and deciding to meet up at Brett's party. Of course, it's actually Walt's, but the poor guy is completely invisible, and no one pays him any attention all night. Mid-party, Jasper makes the decision to break things off with Xavier. He decides that pop is just a fad and it won't last, pointing out that ska is where it's at. Annoyed and upset, Xavier takes out his anger on Nick. When he shows up at the party with a mixed-up CD for Zoe, Xavier pulls down his trousers and throws him in the pool. This explains why Nick thought Xavier was responsible for the prank at the after-party. Anyway, Brett soon jumps in and knocks down Xavier. With Nick trying to air dry the mix CD cover, it gives Brett the opportunity to get close to Zoe, given they're both going to the same college the next year. When Nick catches up to them, he realizes how close they are and changes his mind over the mix CD, believing he's lost his chance. Nick dumps it in the bin and heads out back, drowning his sorrows in alcohol. At the party, Xavier and Chelsea end up drunk together in the bedroom, but she rejects him. He lies though, claiming he slept with Chelsea when he leaves the bedroom. Walt shows up too while the camera is rolling, and the narrative changes to a threesome. This explains why Chelsea has an issue with Xavier, but unfortunately things take an even worse turn. Remember the mix CD? Well, Brett picks it up and claims he made it for Zoe. As he plays it, Nick notices the pair kissing and loses his temper. With a baseball bat, he begins smashing up a car outside. That car happens to belong to Xavier, but as the pair fight, police show up, and Nick realizes what he's done. Xavier decides to press charges, which also means Nick will lose his scholarship. The party ends, Nick is taken away, and the conversation turns back to the present. With the truth revealed, Nick unveils a truth of his own to the group. He shows the note he's. Episode 6 of the Afterparty Season 1 begins with the attention turning to Zoe for the next stage of this investigation. This time though the entire visual palette changes to that of an animation, as Zoe believes her fun zone Zoe has been stuck inside her head, and it's only at the reunion that she's unleashed. The way Zoe narrates the story, turning back and forth while dramatizing her own internal conflict, certainly catches Danner off guard. She claims this is all just a metaphor, but eventually we get moving with the story. Zoe shows up at the party and wants to get drunk with the two Jennifers, but they're both pregnant. However, she also sees everyone looking at her and pitying the woman over her divorce. So in order to quell that, Zoe steps up and sings. Zoe was not actually singing to Nick, she was literally just singing a song to try and stop everyone from looking at her, like the poor divorced woman she believed they were perceiving her to be. While this story is being told, Nick and Jasper manage to leave the former's phone inside and listen to this whole conversation. Anyway, the rest of the story progresses just like we've seen, only this time with zanier visuals and stoner Zoe joining the fray just before the big kiss with Nick. Or not, given her daughter shows up on the timeline. Meanwhile, Jasper and Nick find themselves trapped in a hidden safe room, which happens to have security footage for all over Xavier's house. As they're in the room, Zoe continues her story as she stays with Xavier, complete with the helicopter ride and hanging in Xavier's room. The thing is, he talks about himself the entire time. The only part of this story that's actually something new in the timeline comes from Nick starting to sing for Zoe. With a guitar in hand, he strums his first note and throws up on the floor. In doing so, Nick tumbles over and passes out with his trousers falling around his ankles. Zoe is the one who drew all over Nick's face after this, while Zoe lets loose and allows herself to enjoy the party. The only confession Zoe has to make is that she believes no one actually killed Xavier. She wants Danner to look into saving Nick, but just before she leaves, the captain rings. Danner's time on the case is over. Episode 7 of the Afterparty Season 1 begins with Danner on the verge of losing her badge. She's not even supposed to be on this case, and with the captain arriving imminently, Jasper and Nick continue to listen into their conversation. Zoe arrives and joins them too, with Jasper handing over his earpiece to Zoe. This time the story turns to Danner for some reason. After her father died, everything changed for her. She decided to join the police academy and realized the place was a real boys' club. However, she managed to keep up with most of them, aside from Jermaine, who's the golden boy here. After acing police academy, Danner set out to make a real difference in the community. A homicide report sees Danner excited and deciding to try and solve the crime. When she arrives, Danner believes it's not a simple domestic homicide, but Trisha's report, coupled with Danner's investigative report, manages to show off the footage, the same footage that's online and distributed everywhere, and shows Jermaine, who's in charge of the case. Danner refuses to let this go though, and decides to go rogue, heading out beyond her jurisdiction to Echo Park, where she finds the green-haired woman and her partner. Her name is Willow, and she's taken in for questioning. Apparently she wasn't in Studio City at the time, despite stealing the package off the front porch of the neighbor's place. Eventually, Danner is encouraged to head in and support the interview. It seems there are two different women wearing hoodies with green hair, and Willow appears to have a pretty solid alibi, despite being the #1 suspect. Specifically, that comes from photos on social media confirming her whereabouts at an art exhibit. Danner continues to investigate on her own, believing that Willow is completely innocent. Danner eventually speaks to Willow's attorney, showing him a video unbelieving that Vaughn is the one who killed his wife off the back of her having an affair. Given she works off the book, Danner is relegated to the records room with no hope of advancement. However, Willow is let off the hook and they manage to arrest the right person. With this story finished, Danner confirms she only moves so she can get a fresh start. She sees this case as a chance to do just that. The captain in question is Germain, and with him en route, Danner speaks to Culp and suddenly realizes that she knows who killed Xavier. There's one person they haven't interviewed yet: Zoe's daughter. Episode 8 recap the finale and ending explained. When Detective Danner questions Maggie, Maggie gives her cartoon-based recollection of the night that Xavier died. As her dad, Brett, goes for her cola bear, Maggie sneaks into the after-party, draws on a Nick, and then plays hide-and-seek. Once Brett places her back inside the car, she hears screams, notices the front door is open, and sees Jennifer number 2 as her waters break. After she listens to Maggie's version of events, Detective Danner tells Detective Culp to gather everyone in the main living room. As the guests gather and it's revealed that Jennifer number 2 is in hospital after giving birth, Zoe begins to fear that Brett will get arrested for Xavier's murder. Detective Danner talks through who couldn't have killed Xavier and reveals that Walt, Maggie, and Brett are the only ones who weren't in the living room at the time of Xavier's death. But as Maggie was supposedly asleep, she can be the killer, so Detective Danner speculates whether Invisible Walt killed Xavier so he would get remembered. However, it couldn't be Walt as he was preparing to strip and run through the house nude, which means that it's either Nick or Brett. And Detective Danner reveals that it was Brett. After all, he has the motive to kill Xavier. And Nick is having none of it, and after he reveals a fuzzy memory of Brett in the driveway, he comes to the conclusion that someone was hiding in the closet. Bingo! Detective Danner already knows and never thought that Brett was involved. Instead, she tricked Nick to prove he wasn't involved. And her reason for doing so? Because the killer is Nick's best friend Jasper. The ending. Detective Danner claims that Jasper distracted everyone during the party with his videos, and everyone except Jasper said he entered from the balcony. With Jasper bitter that Xavier was famous, and Xavier making it very clear that they would be friends, and that he would not bless his track, Jasper finally snapped. He tricked Xavier to come upstairs by flashing the bedroom lights. And on the balcony, Jasper punched Xavier before pushing him off the balcony. Due to Detective Danner's past experiences, Aka the girl in the green hair, she realized that Jasper sent a fake text. And to prove it further, Nick adds that hidden CCTV footage would prove it, and that Jasper must have used his phone to delete the footage. A fact that's proven as Jasper has 2 phones on him. Busted? Although Jasper tries to run, Detective Culp handcuffs him. Ultimately, Detective Danner offers to give Nick a recommendation at the academy. As Ostrander and Aldrin arrive, Detective Danner is very smug as she tells them she already has a confession. With the after-party coming to an end, Jennifer number 1 apologizes to Chelsea. Although Chelsea adds that they are not friends, she does, in fact, remember Walt. In the closing scene of the after-party, Nick and Zoe leave together, and they finally kiss. The mood gets ruined, however, as Walt is in the car. Whilst I got some predictions spot on, such as Nick and Zoe getting together and Detective Danner gaining full recognition, I was completely wrong with the identity of the killer. I had never suspected Jasper, and nor was there anything suspect linked to Jennifer number 2's disappearance as I claimed throughout. Regardless, I thoroughly enjoyed the after-party, and I just wish I could have watched it all in one go. What did you think about the Apple TV Plus series The Afterparty Season 1, Episode 8, finale, and the ending? Share your thoughts in comment box. Apple Plus has a real problem with overlong shows. It's something that plagues almost all of its IPs, with episodes that meander on or fail to justify their existence. Truth be told, Servant, Defending Jacob, Invasion and Lacey's Story, to name a few, are each plagued by this issue. Unfortunately, the after-party also slips up here too. Despite that, the after-party is still one of Apple's best shows. It's original, quirky, oddly humorous, and has enough of a hook to keep you sticking around until the end of its 8-episode run. However, that oddity also comes at the cost of accessibility, with this likely to be regarded as a love-hate affair with many people. However, if you're sold after the first few episodes, you're in for quite the rollercoaster ride. The Afterparty is essentially a classic murder mystery spruced up with some modern lingo, a host of colorful and eccentric characters, along with a rather clever genre-hopping tone across its chapters. The gist of the story centers on a high school reunion with a group of characters that have come far since their school days. Among those is Xavier, who's a hotshot celebrity, having starred in the box office smash hit Hungry Hippos and gone on to produce some, subjectively, good tracks. When he's pushed off the balcony of his condo during the reunion after party, it's up to detectives Culp and Anner to figure out who's responsible and why. Now, it's worth prefacing that most critics who received this early, myself included, were only given the first 3 episodes to work with. Apple then added the extra episodes across the weeks, but intentionally held off the finale until after episode 7 had aired. This is important to note because almost every single review you're going to read on this show is not taking into consideration any last-minute twists. That's not to say they're bad, of course, far from it, but it is important to know the ending when accurately reflecting on a murder mystery. After all, an Agatha Christie novel can live or die by who the murderer or suspect is at the end. With that out the way, I can confidently say that the Afterparty does have a solid conclusion, which wraps up its story nicely and almost justifies episode 6 and 7's existence. I say that because both of these chapters feel like filler and slow the pace down to a halt. The former adds absolutely nothing to the show, while episode 7 is exclusively one long flashback. This goes back to that earlier mention about runtime and how Apple shows seem to just drag this out unnecessarily. The characters wrapped up in this mystery are pretty enticing though, and they all have their own quirks, secrets and charismatic quips. While this initially seems annoying, it's actually quite important for how this show is structured. Each of the episodes change the perspective to a different character as we see their version of events from the night in question. In doing so, the tone shifts depending on who's narrating the tale. Brett's episode is all about the action, with a fast and furious gloss, complete with car chases, fighting and a bombastic musical score. Elsewhere, you've got Zoe's episode, which is exclusively shown in hand-drawn animation, while Nick's hopeless romantic story has suitable rom-com stylings. The downside to this approach, of course, is that there's a lot of retreading of familiar ground. A lot of the stories tend to overlap key details from different angles, and as a binge watch, that's a lot more noticeable than watching this leisurely week to week. Either way, there's enough within this to instantly feel a sense of déjà vu almost every episode, which eventually flickers out what promising spark this started with. Solid acting and comedic quips aside, The Afterparty is actually a decent show. It's not groundbreaking despite how its opening few episodes present this, and it is overlong. The resolution and wrap-up of the case is definitely worth sticking it out for though, so if you're in the mood for a good murder mystery, you should find enough to like with